Drop the jewel you stole, now! The mistake cost far more than expected. The chime above the glass doors rang softly as James Walker stepped inside. The cool air of the luxury jewelry store swept over him, a stark contrast to the humid Houston streets outside. He paused for just a second, adjusting his jacket, an old brown corduroy, a bit worn at the elbows. His jeans were clean but faded. His shoes, scuffed leather, practical, not polished. Still, he stood tall. There was something about him, the way he moved, quiet, assured, unbothered. But the staff noticed. Behind the glass counters, a young woman nudged her co-worker with a raised brow. A suited man at the far end of the store glanced up from arranging display trays and whispered something under his breath. Then came the shift, almost imperceptible but palpable, the subtle change in posture, the polite but distant expressions. James noticed. Of course he did. He always did. "Good afternoon," he said, walking up to the front counter where a tall blonde woman stood, arms crossed. Her name tag read Megan, store manager, in silver letters that sparkled just a bit too much. She didn't return the greeting. Her eyes narrowed, scanning him head to toe like a scanner looking for faults. "Can I help you?" she asked, voice crisp like ice. "Yes," James said calmly. "I'm here to pick up a custom order. Should be under the name James." Megan tilted her head. "James?" "Just James," he said, offering a small, easy smile. "You'll find it in the system. Diamond bracelet. Paid in full." She didn't check anything. Instead, she leaned forward slightly. "That bracelet isn't ready yet. And if you're here to pick up someone else's order, I suggest you turn around before I call mall security." James blinked, the smile fading from his lips. "Excuse me?" "Look, I don't know who you are or what scam you think you're running," she said, raising her voice just enough to be heard by the other customers nearby. "But this isn't a pawn shop. You can't just walk in and try to claim high-value merchandise." A few heads turned. A man in a navy blazer looked over his shoulder. A teenage girl held up her phone, recording already. The room, moments ago filled with soft classical music and idle chatter, now buzzed with tension. James inhaled slowly. "Ma'am, I'm not here to cause trouble. I placed an order 3 weeks ago. I received a confirmation email. I've got my receipt right here." He reached into his inner coat pocket and carefully unfolded a crisp, printed receipt. Megan snatched it from his hand and glanced at it for less than 2 seconds before scoffing. "You really went through the trouble of printing a fake receipt? That's commitment, I'll give you that." She slapped the paper back onto the counter. James didn't flinch. The girl behind the counter beside Megan looked uncomfortable. One of the security guards by the entrance shifted his stance, placing a hand near his radio. Megan turned to him. "Call the police." The words hit the room like a dropped chandelier. James held up a hand. "Wait, that's unnecessary. I'm telling you, this is my order. Look again." But Megan wasn't listening. She was already talking to the guard. "Tell them we've got a man attempting to steal a customer's order, probably using stolen credit info." James clenched his jaw. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout, but his eyes, calm and steady, fixed on Megan with a quiet intensity. "I suggest," he said slowly, "that you check the system before you make assumptions you'll regret." Megan smirked. "Are you threatening me now?" A mother nearby pulled her child a little closer. Another man muttered something under his breath. James could feel the heat of judgment burning into his back. He didn't move. The security guard spoke quietly into his radio. The girl at the register, younger, maybe mid-20s, with nervous eyes, fidgeted. Her name tag read Rachel. She glanced at James, her forehead tightening. Something about him looked familiar. She looked at the receipt again, now crumpled on the glass counter. Her hand hovered above it. Megan shot her a glare, and she backed off. A few minutes later, the sliding doors opened again, this time with flashing red and blue lights painting the floor. 2 uniformed officers walked in, alert but calm. One rested a hand on his belt as he approached James. "Sir, we've had a report of an attempted theft," the officer said carefully. "We'd like to ask you a few questions." James nodded. "Of course. But first, I'd like anyone, to just check the system for my order." He turned to Megan again. Please, one last time. Look up the name James, custom diamond bracelet. The silence in the store was suffocating. Megan folded her arms again. Fine, if it'll get you out of here faster. She tapped the screen behind the counter, sighing dramatically. As she typed, Rachel leaned forward slightly, watching the monitor. Her expression changed. Her eyes widened. But before she could speak, Megan stiffened. She turned pale, then red, then pale again. She looked at James, then down at the order, then back at the officers, and then, without a word, stepped away from the counter. The officers exchanged a look. James waited. Behind him, customers whispered louder now. The energy in the room was shifting, confusion mixing with discomfort. The teenage girl lowered her phone slightly, her recording still going. James reached down, picked up his crumpled receipt, and straightened it gently. He looked at Megan one more time, voice calm, deliberate. Respect, he said, isn't a courtesy. It's a basic expectation. The officers, now unsure, began to speak into their radios, but before they could finish, the store's front doors opened again. This time not with sirens, but with sharp, deliberate footsteps. A man in a dark navy suit stepped inside. His presence turned heads immediately. His hair was perfectly styled, his expression unreadable, his pace purposeful. The man walked straight past the counter, past the murmuring crowd, and stopped next to James. "Mr. Walker," he said with a nod. "Apologies for the delay." Then he turned to the room, scanning the faces, staff, customers, officers, and finally Megan, who now stood frozen near the edge of the counter. "I'm William Turner," he said, "Regional Director of Westbury and Lane." And the room fell silent. The murmurs swelled into a low hum as the two officers stepped closer to James, forming a subtle but unmistakable barrier between him and the store's counter. "Sir, can we see some identification?" the taller of the two asked, his tone neutral but firm. James nodded and slowly reached into his wallet, pulling out his ID. He handed it over without protest, maintaining the same calm he'd worn since the moment Megan accused him. But Megan wasn't finished. "She's right," she said sharply, stepping toward the officers. "That bracelet isn't his. He came in here with some fake receipt and is trying to scam us, probably using stolen customer data or credit card fraud. You've seen the type." The word type hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. James looked at her, his jaw tightening. His hands remained visible. His voice remained calm. "Officers," he said, turning to them with steady eyes. "You can run that ID. It's real. Just like the receipt." He carefully unfolded the crumpled paper once more and laid it on the glass counter, smoothing it out with deliberate fingers. "This bracelet is mine, ordered under my name, paid in full in this very store 3 weeks ago. If anyone would simply check the system—" "He's lying!" Megan snapped, cutting him off again. "Anyone can print a fake receipt and slap a name on it. He probably pulled the details off another customer's email. I've seen scams like this before." "Ma'am," the second officer said carefully, "if we could just check the store's records—" "I've already checked," Megan lied, crossing her arms. "There's no such order under James. He's wasting everyone's time." The murmurs from the crowd grew louder. A man near the back shook his head. "Unbelievable." A woman whispered to her friend, "The nerve." The teenage girl from earlier was still recording, slowly panning from James to the officers to Megan and back again. James turned slightly, taking in the room, their faces, their assumptions, all of them deciding who he was based on the clothes he wore and the quiet way he stood his ground. Across the counter, Rachel watched. Her heart pounded in her chest. She recognized him. She was the one who helped him design the bracelet, helped finalize the order, process the payment, and even congratulated him on his excellent taste. She'd printed the receipt herself, but she didn't speak, because Megan was standing inches away, arms folded, jaw set, and Rachel was still new, still trying to prove herself, still too scared. James met her eyes for just a second, and he knew. But he didn't expose her. Instead, he turned back to the officers. "The bracelet I ordered has a platinum chain. Minimalist setting. 3 small diamonds, square cut in the center. No engraving. It's a corporate gift. I had it listed under the name James because that's how I introduced myself when I first came in. One of the officers raised an eyebrow. You know the employee who helped you? Her name was Rachel, James said quietly. Rachel flinched. Megan turned sharply toward her. Is that true? Rachel opened her mouth, then hesitated. I don't know, she stammered. I mean, maybe. James raised a hand gently. It's all right, he said. But the doubt had begun to flicker across the officers' faces. They weren't grabbing him. They weren't cuffing him. They were listening. Megan saw it too, and panicked. Oh, come on, she burst out, waving a hand toward the counter. This is ridiculous. Look at him. Does he look like someone who walks in here and spends thousands on jewelry? Please, you're letting him talk in circles and waste everyone's time. Rachel looked like she was going to be sick. The younger officer cleared his throat. Ma'am, you said there was no order under the name James. Would you mind showing us that search? Megan hesitated. Just a split second, but enough to notice. I already exited the system. The officer narrowed his eyes, then logged back in, and that's when the double doors opened again. Not with noise, but with presence. A man in a navy blue suit strode in, clean lines and calm authority following every step. He didn't look around nervously. He didn't seem confused. He walked straight through the center of the store like he owned it. Because he did. Megan's voice caught in her throat. Mr. Turner? William Turner gave her a brief nod and kept walking. Officers, he said smoothly. Good afternoon. They turned, slightly caught off guard. Good afternoon, sir. We were just... I know, he said, cutting in gently. I was informed there was a misunderstanding here. He turned toward James and extended a hand. Mr. Walker, my apologies for the delay. James shook his hand without a word. The entire room fell into a stunned silence. Even the woman filming lowered her phone slightly, uncertain of what she was witnessing. William faced the crowd. My name is William Turner. I'm the regional director for Westbury and Lane. He turned back toward Megan, and I believe we've had a serious error in judgment. Megan opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Rachel looked like she might faint. The officers stepped back, no longer in control of the situation, and clearly grateful for it. William continued, voice calm but cutting. Mr. Walker is not only a valued customer. He is, in fact, the majority shareholder of this company, having acquired controlling interest several weeks ago through a private transaction. The store went absolutely still. One customer gasped. Another whispered, "Oh my God." Megan looked like she'd been punched. James remained quiet, his eyes never leaving hers. Rachel slowly stepped forward, voice barely above a whisper. I remember the order. He's telling the truth." William nodded. "Thank you, Rachel." He turned back to the counter, where Megan stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. And for the first time, James spoke, not to the officers, not to Megan, not to the crowd, but to the room. "Sometimes," he said, voice low, "people are so determined to be right, they forget to be kind." And the room was silent again, but this time it wasn't judgment. It was shame. "Would someone," William Turner said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade, "please tell me exactly what happened here?" His tone wasn't angry. It didn't have to be. It was the voice of a man used to being obeyed without question. Megan found her voice first, the panic showing only slightly at the edges of her usually sharp confidence. "Mr. Turner, this man, he came in claiming he had a custom order, but the name didn't match anything in our system. He became confrontational when I asked him to leave. I was protecting store assets." William raised a single hand. The gesture was small, but it silenced her like a slammed door. "I wasn't asking you, Megan," he said, without even looking at her. Then he turned to James. The change in his posture was subtle but unmistakable. "Mr. Walker," he said, bowing his head slightly, "I apologize for this. On behalf of the entire Westbury and Lane brand, you deserve better." Their collective gasp swept through the room. One woman actually dropped her phone. A man near the door straightened his collar. Rachel took a half step back as if her knees might give way. Megan paled. Wait, Mr. Walker. William didn't answer her. His eyes remained on James. James, still calm, simply nodded. Thank you, William. It was just a name, but the familiarity in how James said it echoed like a bomb. He knows him? William turned toward the officers. Gentlemen, I appreciate your quick response, but there is no theft, no fraud. This gentleman owns more of this company than I do. Silence, not a sound. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. He is, William continued, the majority shareholder of Westbury and Lane as of last month. His acquisition went through quietly, his choice, and he asked that operations remain uninterrupted. We honored that. Clearly, not everyone here did. His eyes slid toward Megan. She looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under her. There must be some mistake. There is, William said, and it was yours. He gestured toward the display case. That bracelet you refuse to release? It's one of 20 pieces Mr. Walker commissioned personally for a corporate gifting initiative he created after the acquisition. Custom designs, top-tier craftsmanship, all to be distributed to executive partners across the state. He turned to Rachel. You handled that order, didn't you? Rachel nodded, finally stepping forward. Her voice trembled but held. Yes, I did. I remember now. He was polite. He knew exactly what he wanted. I processed everything. It was paid in full the same day. Megan turned on her. You knew and didn't say anything? Rachel's chin lifted. I was afraid. You always shut people down when you think you're right. William held up a hand again. Enough. He faced the store. This isn't just about a miscommunication, he said, voice rising slightly so that every customer and staff member could hear. This is about prejudice. It's about assuming someone's worth by how they dress or speak, about letting your ego blind you to basic decency. He turned back to Megan, now trembling behind the counter. You didn't follow protocol. You didn't check the system. You didn't listen to the customer. Worse, you escalated things and involved law enforcement when none was necessary. You embarrassed this company. You embarrassed yourself. A customer near the back muttered, Wow. Another whispered, Good. Megan shook her head, almost in disbelief. You're firing me. I'm replacing you, William said coldly. Effective immediately. Collect your things. HR will be in contact. A long silence followed. Then, slowly, a few people began clapping, not in celebration, but in support. Support for James, support for justice. James looked at Megan as she gathered her purse with shaking hands. I didn't need anyone to apologize, he said quietly. I needed someone to do the right thing before it came to this. Megan said nothing. She walked out through the front doors she once owned with her presence, now invisible. William turned to James again. Would you like to take your bracelet now? James nodded. Rachel stepped forward again. I'll get it. She disappeared into the back, returning moments later with a sleek black box. Her hands shook as she handed it over. I'm sorry, she whispered. James looked her in the eye. You spoke up when it mattered. That counts. She smiled, small and grateful. William nodded toward the officers, who by now looked half out of place, half impressed. Thank you, officers. We're all set here. One of them approached James. We're sorry, sir. Truly. James shook his hand. The customers in the store seemed to melt away, watching with new eyes. A few approached him quietly, offering apologies or embarrassed looks. One woman patted his arm. A boy, maybe 10, tugged at his mother's sleeve. Is that man famous? The mother bent down. No, sweetheart, she said, glancing over at James with wide eyes. But he should be. James didn't hear it, or maybe he did, and simply smiled to himself. For a moment, Megan didn't move. She stood behind the counter, eyes darting between William, James, and the stunned faces of the customers. It was as if she were waiting for someone, anyone, to jump to her defense, but no one did. She opened her mouth. You can't be serious. I've been with this store for 7 years. I've hit every sales target. I've trained half the people here. You're going to throw all that away because of him. The room tensed again. William didn't flinch. No, he said coolly. "I'm letting you go because of you, because of what you did, what you said, and the example you just set, and for your team, for these customers, for this brand." Megan's voice cracked. "I didn't mean to—" "You meant exactly what you did," he interrupted, sharp now. "That's the problem." Tears welled in her eyes, but the damage was done. Her confidence was gone. She gathered her things with trembling hands, trying not to meet anyone's gaze. When she reached the door, she paused, just for a second, then walked out into the Houston sun, her exit quiet, humbling. William turned, now facing the store. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, lifting his voice slightly, "before we go on with our day, there's someone who deserves the floor." He looked at James. "Mr. Walker, if you'd like to say anything, now would be the time." James didn't rush. He stepped forward slowly, bracelet box still in his hand, his eyes scanning the room, the customers, the staff, the officers, Rachel. He spoke with calm strength, no anger, no vengeance, just truth. "I wasn't surprised today," he began. "That's the sad part. I walked in here expecting someone would look at my jacket, my jeans, and assume I didn't belong." He paused. The room was silent, everyone hanging on his words. "What I didn't expect," he continued, "was that someone would be so sure of their judgment they'd rather call the police than check a receipt." A couple of people shifted uncomfortably. A woman wiped at her eyes. "I'm not here to shame anyone," James said. "But I am here to say this. Respect isn't something you give to people because they're wearing a suit, or a watch, or shoes that cost more than rent. It's something you give because they're a person." He looked directly at Rachel, not accusing but acknowledging. "There's nothing wrong with being cautious in business," he said, "but there's a line between caution and contempt, between safety and profiling." Then he turned to the officers. "Thank you for treating me with dignity once you had the facts. That's all anyone wants." One of the officers nodded solemnly. James held up the black box with the bracelet. "This was supposed to be a gift, a symbol of appreciation in my company. Today it became a symbol of something else. It reminded me why I do what I do, why I wanted to be involved in this company at all, because the way you treat people matters, even, especially, when you think no one is watching." There was a long silence. Then someone clapped, just once, then again. Another joined in. And soon a ripple of applause filled the store. It wasn't thunderous. It was respectful, grateful. Rachel stepped forward slowly, her voice cracked as she spoke. "Mr. Walker, I'm sorry, I should have spoken up earlier. I was afraid, but that's no excuse." James nodded. "Thank you, Rachel. It takes courage to admit that out loud." William stepped forward again. "We'll be issuing a full refund for the order," he said. "And I'd like you to stay a few minutes after the store clears. We'd like to have a proper meeting. No assumptions, just respect." James nodded again, then looked out at the crowd. It was quieter now, more thoughtful. Customers who had judged him just minutes earlier now looked at him with respect, or perhaps more accurately with regret. He walked toward the exit, passing display cases gleaming with things that no longer held meaning in that moment. The most valuable thing in the room hadn't been behind glass. It had been the truth he spoke. As he pushed the door open, the chime rang softly once again. Outside, sunlight hit his face. That boy, standing with his mother near the entrance, stared up at him in awe. "Mom," the boy whispered, tugging at her coat. "Was that man famous?" She glanced at James, then back at her son. "He is now," she said. James smiled to himself and walked on.